Welcome to Armchair Expat, the podcast meant to get you out of your lazy boy and into your new life abroad. I'm Shannon Acton, founder of Bargain Homes Abroad, and I'm riding shotgun as we chase the dream of life beyond borders. Each episode, we'll hear stories from people who've left their comfort zone to explore the world. They'll share their highs, their lows, and their in-betweens, all meant to lovingly light a fire under your bum, so you can stop dreaming about it and start living it. So if you're stuck in your comfy recliner, scrolling through dreamy destinations, wondering what if, it's time to swap that raggedy old armchair for a one-way ticket. Let's freaking go, people. Wherever you go, there you are. Today's episode explores what that really means when you've built a life across multiple countries. My guest, Laura Baringer, has lived and worked around the world, from Italy and Africa to the UK and now the Netherlands, building an international career, raising a family abroad, and making deeply intentional decisions about when to move and when to stay. We talk about the real trade-offs of life abroad, why no place will ever fix everything, and how designing your life around values, not fantasy, can change everything. Let's dive in. Hi, Laura. Welcome to the Armchair Expat. I'm glad you're here.
Hi, it's so great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I am super excited to jump into this conversation. So why don't we first start, like we always do in every podcast, with a little bit about your background and upbringing, where you're from, and then we'll get into how you moved abroad.
Yeah, sure. So, well, in terms of my background and upbringing, I was born in the US. My mom is Italian. So I grew up speaking Italian and was very much raised as like, you are Italian. And I think that really formed a lot of the decisions I made later in life about moving was really this idea that you're Italian. And so I spoke Italian to her and we lived there when I was 10. But I really grew up in the US and went to university, went to college in the US, and then kind of started a lot of my non-US time. And I now live in the Netherlands. I live in Utrecht, so like 30 minutes south of Amsterdam.
And where in the U.S. did you spend the majority of
Oh,
your
so I
life?
grew up in Washington, D.C.
Okay. So
So
East
my
Coast.
parents, so East Coast, right? My parents were like, oh, this feels really European. And my mom was like, this kind of reminds me. So it kind of was this place that they decided felt European. And so that's where I grew up in the city.
Okay. And then so you spent some time in Italy when you were 10, you said. Tell me about that experience and how that shaped your identity.
Yeah, so I mean, it was really helpful in terms of understanding more of what it meant to be Italian. I mean, I think like a lot of people who have immigrant parents, right, you kind of understand the culture that they come from, but living in it is a totally different experience. And so my mom had kind of wanted to try if she could live in Italy and if she could work in Italy. And so this year was kind of a big family experiment. And it was like a 364-day experiment because my mom was on a green card and she was only allowed to be out of the US for a year. So it was like, if it works for a year, maybe we'll see if we make it longer, but like it's going to be a year. And it was a really fun time for my brother, who's 3 years older. It was the reason why he's been out of the US since he was 17. He moved to Italy for university and stayed there for 10 years and now lives in Berlin. So it was this like very formative experience. It changed a lot of, I felt like I came back a very different person. Like my friend groups were different. I'd kind of had this experience that I didn't know how to communicate. And my friend groups, I didn't feel like I could just slot right back into my old friend group. So it definitely impacted kind of because I was in 5th grade when I came back. I spent 4th grade in Italy. Little things like I learned Italian geography. And when I came back, everybody had done like the US states and the US capitals. And I was like, I don't know I can tell you all the Italian regions and capitals, but I don't know any of the US capitals, right? And so it was just, and it was it was in the 90s, early 90s. Like there was no internet. I wasn't communicating with anyone. And my parents certainly didn't know how to deal with that reentry for me. So it was it was a little sink or swim. So there was a lot of I have certainly done things differently with my kids, like moving and coming back and helping them get oriented. But for me, as like an 11-year-old, there was a lot of adapting and redoing friend groups. And then when I went to high school, all of my friends were international. They were either diplomats' kids or like half of another parent. Like that was just the group that I ended up feeling more at home with, were people who also had kind of this other half, this other culture.
Yeah. So then you attended college in the US, and then so what was your first foray after your 4th and 5th grade
Yeah.
trip to Italy,
Well, so
or
I
not
think what
trip,
that
but
move did was like, I really felt Italian. I really felt this pull to like live in Italy, in part because of that time there, in part because my brother had left and seemed happy. And so after university, there was no question, like, I'm moving to Italy. Like, I need to understand, I will teach English, which is what I did at first, and realized I hated teaching English. Right. But I moved there and I was like, and in my head, I was like, I'm going to be here for 5 years, maybe the rest of my life.
Mhm.
Right. And then I quickly realized that I am far more American than I thought I was. I was like, oh,
Well, let
this does not work for me.
ooh, let's talk about that. So, I mean, because you had already spent a lot of time in Italy and
Yeah.
grown up in that kind of multicultural family.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
once you got there, what was different than
Right.
your expectations?
Well, I think part of it was that finding a community was hard because I was 22 living on my own, and a lot of the Italian university system is typically longer, right? So people a lot of times, and obviously this all depends on schooling, but a lot of times you're what we call our bachelor's and our master's are attached into like a 5-year program. And it's not uncommon for people to stretch that out a little bit longer or because of finances to live at home. And so here I am, this like 22-year-old. All of my peers, age wise, are in school, living at home. They're not cooking for themselves. They're not doing their own laundry, right? They're not worrying about their taxes. And all of the people who were in my life situation were like 5 to 7 years older than me. So it was really, so they were like, who's this 22-year-old, right? So I was working, I ended up getting a job at like this international book fair company. So I ended up working in their like school programming. And I mean, I liked that job a lot, but it was definitely like nobody knew what to do with me. So that was kind of one thing where I was even more of a fish out of water than I think I'd felt in the US. One of the things I do love about the US, um, and it's a little hard to talk about the US in today's political environment, but one of the things that I really loved was just like we're used to people from all over, right? Like we're like the US is like the giant melting pot. And there was this real need amongst my colleagues and people I met to like define me. They're like, oh, I can't place you. Like, where's your accent from? Or like, oh, you do things this way, we do things this way. And that was a really hard environment for me to be in as somebody who was just trying to figure out who I was and where I belonged and what was me, to kind of have this like, oh, well, here, they're very, my experience of my colleagues was like they were very particular about, well, and here we eat things this way and there they eat things that way. And not all Italians are like that, of course, but a lot of the culture is one of the things that's beautiful about Italy is this appreciation for local things and the way things are done. And as a 22-year-old who didn't know herself, that was a really hard environment to be in. I needed to be somewhere where I could explore, where I could be myself, where I could just try all sorts of different things in ways that were different than the way people were doing them. And I didn't find that in Italy.
And so when you came to that realization, what did you do?
Mm, Well, my boyfriend, now husband, got into grad school in the US. So after 2 years in Italy, I was like, okay, I think I'm ready to go back. And so he got into grad school. I went back and tried to figure out in Boston, which wasn't a whole lot easier than trying to figure it out in Italy, if I'm being honest. Like, it's all right. We're all the same people. And I think that's one of the big things about moving around a lot and exploring different cultures is like those things follow you, right? You can't change location. Location does help, but you're still the same person, right? And certain environments can make us freer and make us feel better. But at the end of the day, if there's something fundamental that is chasing you, no location is going to make it go away, right? You just have to figure it out in that place. And so all of my moving kind of allowed for me to figure it out along the way, but I never expected a place to solve it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So
Yeah, so
you're
we
in Boston.
went back. Yeah, so we're in Boston for a few years or for 2 years. And then I'm like, well, I want to go to grad school. And I had been working in local public health. I had also been volunteering for an education organization that worked in Malawi. So while I was working full time, I was also volunteering for that organization. It was a small nonprofit, so I was like doing their business operations. And I was like, okay, well, I have international experience and I have domestic health experience, but I want to work in international health. So let me go get some international health experience while I apply to grad school. So then I went to Guatemala for 6 months and volunteered, worked on my Spanish, volunteered for some local health organizations, one that did sex ed education for young people and one that worked with midwives, with local midwives and traditional birth attendants. So I did that, and then I got into grad school. So then I went to New York for grad school, and I did a dual public health, public administration program. So I was there for 3 years. And while I was in grad school, right, I spent one summer in Mexico. I spent one summer in Nigeria. And kind of at this point, when I was in my later 20s, I was like, I kind of knew that the US wasn't going to be a place where I was going to be forever, right? And so part of the focus on Spanish in Latin America was this idea of I want to work, and my focus had always been maternal health and sexual and reproductive health. And I was like, I want to work in Latin America because I want to be someplace where I can speak the language, right? And I want to be somewhere where I can integrate more. And I don't really think I can learn, or I don't know if I have interest to learn such a specialized language that I would need on the African continent. And so that was kind of my focus with Guatemala. But then so I lived in Mexico for a summer, interning there. And then kind of throughout that process, I was like, but the reality is Latin America doesn't have money for the job that I want, right? Like in terms of sexual and reproductive health and maternal health, they are so much further along than other parts of the world in terms of kind of basic services and where the education is around some of those issues. I was like, unless I want to live in a Latin American country permanently, I don't really feel good about focusing on Latin America. Like, I don't think the jobs that I want, because I still wasn't at this place where I really felt like I could settle somewhere, right? And be like, oh yeah, that's the culture, that's the country for me. And so moving to Latin America and finding a job there felt like a really big commitment that I didn't feel like I was ready to make. And the work that I was interested in, programmatic work that maybe was a little more transient, the focus wasn't on Latin America. The focus was on Asia and sub-Saharan Africa. And so then my last year of grad school, I was like, okay, well, I'll go to Nigeria. So I went to Nigeria for a few months and I really liked that. I was like, okay, this is great. This is kind of the scrappiness that is good for me and that I like. And so then I switched my career focus to sub-Saharan Africa, which is how ultimately, many years later, we ended up in Rwanda. So I was in graduate school. I graduated from graduate school. I was living in New York. I got a job in New York because my husband had just gotten his dream job. And I hated that job in New York. It was a local doing like New York public health. And I was really bored and didn't feel like we could move abroad yet because he needed a few years at his job to they could eventually move us abroad, or out of the US, but we didn't feel like the time wasn't quite right. And so I was really bored in my job and I was like, well, it could take us years to get pregnant. So why don't we try now? So then of course we try and I get pregnant right away. And so then I'm like, oh crap. Like I don't like my job. And there's really only a handful of global health international NGOs in New York. So we should move to DC, and he was kind of splitting his time between DC and New York anyway. So 6 months pregnant, I moved to DC. I consult so I have 2 kids in 2.5 years. Or I guess 3 years if you include pregnancy. And we're like, okay, we're going to have kids in DC. DC is going to be our launch pad. Like, we don't want to be in DC forever. It's where I grew up. He grew up. He spent a lot of time nearby. I was like, I know what this life looks like, and I don't want this life for 30 years. So we were like, okay, DC will be our launch pad to like have kids and then figure out where to go. So when I was pregnant with my second, he got a transfer job to London. So when my youngest was 12 weeks old, we moved to London. And then we were in London for 3 years. And then I got a job in Rwanda. And we were in Rwanda for 3 years. And now we're in the Netherlands.
Oh my goodness.
So and I'm happy to talk about those final jobs.
I'm like, wow, like how do you keep that track in your mind? First of all, that's a lot of bouncing around.
Yeah.
All of that to say, like, obviously that takes a very disciplined approach, but also a very flexible approach, right? Like there's that duality of you have this long-term vision, you want to be abroad, you use Washington DC as your launch pad, and then you end up I mean, it's kind of it's an amazing journey, and it all goes to show that, as long as you have that vision, you can make it.
Absolutely. Right. You have to be okay with the trade-offs,
Yeah.
right?
Speak
That
speak more
brings.
about that. Speak more about the trade-offs.
Well, I mean, yeah, some of the things that are hard, right? Like, uh, rebuilding community each time, right? So both from
Mhm.
a professional aspect, right? Sometimes I'm like, well, if I just stayed in these jobs longer, like maybe I would have, been further in my career at the time that I was frustrated that my career wasn't further along, right? So community is a big one of like, yes, you can make a stronger community if you stay in a place longer. So I had a really great community in DC. I had done my like my mom group there when I had my first kid. So we were all bonded around our first kids coming at within the same month, basically. And that was a community that I left, right? Those mom friends. And same thing in London, right? You start to build these communities and then you leave. Other trade offs, being far from your close family and friends, right? My friends are scattered across the US. My parents split their time between Italy and the US, but I am far from them, right? I make a really concerted effort to stay in touch with a handful of friends that are important to me. And I think that's something that I'm good at. My husband is not good at that. So he just doesn't really have friends. But I'm like, no, I have like my best friend from college. I talk to her, a couple times a month. We have a time slot that works for us. So I think that being far in the community are probably two of the biggest trade offs that you get. I think a lot of people who are part of a more traditional expat community where they're moving with their job, right? Like the job is a 3-year, a 5-year stint in this place, their community ends up being the job community,
Mhm.
right? Where if you're moving jobs and you're moving places every couple years, you're starting from scratch every time. So you get used to that and you understand how long it takes, right? Like when we moved to London, I was like, I've done this enough. I know it takes at least a year. I'm not going to make any decisions about how much I like it, where I want to be until I've been here a year, because that's just how long it takes for you to like actually feel like, okay, I know this place.
Mhm.
Right? Don't make any gut impulse decisions in your first 3 or 6 months. Like that's just how long it takes to settle into anywhere. Like you will feel different in a year and then decide what you want to do. Better give it 2. Right. And so I knew that helped me with each subsequent move.
How was the move different when you went to London with children versus moves prior? I would imagine there's a lot more logistics to handle, but also like just I can't
Yeah.
imagine. 12 weeks was your youngest was
Yeah. My
12 weeks
youngest
when
was
you moved?
12 weeks. Yeah. Yeah. 11 weeks, 12 weeks. And yeah, my oldest was 2.5. In some ways, it was the easiest age to move with kids because then we
Okay.
moved when my oldest was 6 or 5.5. And then again when she was 8.5. So in some ways it's the easiest one because they don't really know what's going on in many ways. They're like, okay, as long as you're here, I'm happy.
Sure.
Right. But then the stuff on your list to do when it's just you're like, okay, I need a house. I need a job. Right. Like I can figure everything else. And this is like, okay, well, the first thing I need to learn to navigate after I get my housing set up is childcare. Right. And so for me, because I was working and like that was a really, my husband was obviously working and I was working. So the first thing was like, okay, let's find you. So the questions that you're asking before you even move are like, okay, what's the childcare system? How long are the wait lists? Where do I find? What do I expect? All of the stuff you navigate in your home country, but you suddenly you have to learn it in a new country. And if you don't know the way things work, it can be challenging. Right. And in Rwanda, so in the London, it was a childcare facility which luckily worked very much the same as it did in the US. So that wasn't much of a surprise, but it was like, where can we find a slot? And, for the first couple of months, we didn't have a slot. So how am I finding what apps are there to find babysitters? Like what Facebook group should I be on? Right. All of that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And then the Rwanda was full-time nanny is the norm for people with my kind of job and the way that we moved there. So then it was like, okay, let me navigate how you find a person, how much you pay them interviewing, like what are the cultural norms, like what should I be looking for? And then when we moved to the Netherlands, it was school. right? So your big
Yeah.
criteria becomes more around your kids than when it's just yourself and you're like, oh, where would be a fun place to go? Let me live in like a cool part of town. Now you're like, okay, where do the other families live? Where can I find community? Where can I find people like me? So that
Yeah.
it's just a totally different framework.
So for the last two moves, when your children were a little bit older and more established or had like a social network, how were the last two moves and how have they adjusted to that? How did you support them, one, and how did they kind of get into their community or, into their
Yeah.
social networks?
Yeah. I mean, I think Rwanda is really good. If you go to some of these countries where you are really part of the expat bubble, right? And you are pretty removed in many ways from
Mm.
local society. There's the language barrier. There's also the financial barrier, right? Like I lived a really privileged life there, right? So you're in this expat bubble that is very transient. And so in some
Hmm.
ways that makes the moving a lot easier because the kids at school, they haven't been at the same school with the same group of 5 people for the last 5 years. There's constantly new kids coming and going. And so it makes it a much softer landing for your kids because kids are more open to new friend groups, right? Versus in the Netherlands, you don't have that as much. And one of the reasons why we picked the school that we did in the Netherlands was because every 2 years, they completely reshuffle the classes of all the
Mm.
kids in the classes. And so we were like, okay, that's good because then those kids will be used to new kids coming in and they might have their friends, but there's not going to be these like really strong cliques or as strong, right? Than if a
Yeah.
school is like one class from K up to 6 is all the same kids all the time. Those kids are just there's gonna be a much harder time entering.
I wanted to step back and ask you a little bit about your relationship. Like you've been, your husband has his career, you have your career, and there's been points in time where you move for your career or you've moved for his career. How do you handle that? And how do you make that work?
Yeah. Well, the first 6 years of our relationship, we did a lot of long distance. So kind of that whole time of like, you know, me going to Guatemala and then going to Mexico and then going to Nigeria, like he was also doing his own travel during
Mm.
that time. And so a lot of that was we kind of had this understanding of like, we need to do these things for ourselves and like we'll still be together or we'll be fine. We'll kind of see how it goes. And so I think that was like a really solid foundation. He's moved way more than I have. So his first 20 years were all like a lot of moving. And so he's really comfortable with moving around, probably more so than I am. And so that first part of the relationship was fine. It was like when we decided to get married, and that was like the year before I got pregnant. So during grad school, that's when it was like, oh, we're not making individual decisions anymore. We are like, this is a decision to like actually stay together. And like, yeah, if you need to like, travel for work and stuff, that's fine. But like, we're moving together. And so there has been a little bit of like, okay, this move is for you, this move is for me, right? The London move was for his work, the Rwanda move was for my work. And then the Netherlands move was really we're tired of moving. And the
Mm.
kids are now asking for us to, especially my oldest, who is neurodiverse and has a hard time with change. There was a decision around we need to pick a place where we can be through secondary school. And so our decision to move to the Netherlands was also around the time that I left the field of international development, where I had moved there. I worked for a global health. I like started the Rwandan branch of a global health organization, worked on like the program of my dreams. But at the end, it really solidified that it was time for me to leave the international development field. I just didn't feel ethically and morally that it was a place where I should really work anymore, knowing that
Mm.
I didn't want to live in Rwanda forever. And I was like, I can't be a white North American working on these programs anymore. It just doesn't feel aligned with my values. So that was happening at the same time that we were starting to think about where do we go next. So that kind of so I was going through my own process of like, who am I when I leave this field? My whole identity as a person was this job and this field that I'd been in for 20 years. And so it also shifted to like, okay, well, what do we want for our family? What are our values? What do we care about? Where do we want to be? And so then we made a spreadsheet. We like took all of our values, we like made our family mission statement, Emily Oster style, and like put out all of our values and what we wanted in a place, which included like simple thing, like things that are easy to measure, like walkability, air quality, access to airports, right? We wanted to be close to an airport. So simpler things like that. And then some that are less, I guess, quantifiable, like we really wanted a country that had good social services and like felt like it cared about its people. Like that was important to us. We wanted something that felt a little more culturally aligned. Like we looked at Italy, but at the end, because the Italian culture is hard for me, probably just a lot of baggage from being younger. But that wasn't a place that I was like, oh, I'm really excited about raising my kids here. It was like, even though it would have been so much easier, I speak the language, I understand the culture. It was like, this is not a place I would feel good at being in long term. And so some of those things were a little less quantifiable. So we put together our spreadsheet and then we had our kind of top 5 cities. And then we kind of went through process of elimination. We visited them. We just kind of went and spent some time in them again. And then at that point, we had kind of narrowed down on Amsterdam, but we didn't know if we wanted to live in Amsterdam, if we wanted to live kind of around Amsterdam. And we also wanted the kids to be part of the process at this point. So we basically told them, we were like, look, they gave us 2 criteria to put on the spreadsheet. One was riding bikes and one was eating cheese sandwiches. So we felt like we picked a good one.
Well, there you go.
Because you'll do both of those. Exactly. So we were like, we think we have picked a place, but we want you guys to have a voice in this, right? I took the they have a voice, not a vote approach. And so we were like, we want, if you guys say absolutely not, and if you hate it, we will take that into consideration. And so on our way from Rwanda to the US, we spent a week in the Netherlands with them. And it was COVID, it was December, it was rainy. So we were just in the cargo bike, the kids wearing their rain jackets and they just had the best time. And we were like, okay, if you have the best time sitting in a cargo bike in the rain, in the dark, we think you'll be okay.
And how did you feel about it? So obviously they loved it. But how did you and your husband feel about it?
My husband felt good about it. I mean, one of the criteria was that we wanted to have some sort of relationship or some sort of knowledge of the place before to move there. We didn't want to pick, for a hot minute, Lisbon was on the list. And we were like, we just don't know enough about it. There's the worry that after 3 years, we'll want to leave because we don't like it. We want to live in a place where we feel like we're going in really clear on the pros and cons so that we'll stay long term, because we didn't want to do another move in 3 years.
Had you spent a lot of time in the Netherlands prior to this?
Not really.
Okay.
My husband had spent a year abroad in Amsterdam.
Okay.
So that was how it made the cut.
He was very familiar with it.
So no, we hadn't spent much time there, but that's kind of how it was. We felt like, okay, we kind of know what we're getting and we understand Dutch culture. And there was a really big Dutch community in Rwanda. And so a lot of our friends in Rwanda were Dutch. And so we felt like we understood it enough. And then while we were there for this week and we were kind of touring around all of the places we could possibly live, our friends from Rwanda lived in Utrecht. And they were like, well, why don't you come down and see us and we'll hang out. And then they, of course, had COVID, so we couldn't see them, but we borrowed their bikes and we rode all around town. And we were like, oh, this is actually the better option. We can't afford the house that we want in the place we want in Amsterdam. And Utrecht is basically Amsterdam without the tourists. So we were
Smaller,
like, this is
too. And
also, why would we move? We know enough. Why move to a city 40 minutes away from the only people you know in the country when they live in a perfectly nice town? Why would you not give yourself that buffer? And I think that was a big, no, you don't have to do this the hard way. Yeah, Amsterdam probably would be great. I'd have a lot more English classes that I could go to. I'd probably have a bigger community. It would be more transient for sure, but I'd probably have more friends at this point than I do. But I have friends in Utrecht and I like Utrecht. I like the smaller town. So yeah, it's going to be harder. It's going to take me longer to build community. I'm going to have to learn Dutch, but I'm not going to see them if I live in Amsterdam. So why would I do that? And now our kids go to the same school, right? Why would I not do that? But so that felt like a very different decision than old Laura.
Yeah, I like that. And from the point that you spent that time in the Netherlands, you went back to the US and you had said, oh, and you decided, okay, yeah, the Netherlands is where we want to be. The kids are on board, we're on board. Walk me through kind of the timeline of getting there and how you got there, because at this point you're going to build your own business, right? So
Right.
it's not, you're not moving because you have jobs established there. You're
No,
moving
neither
for a
one of us
different
had
reason
jobs.
and
Yeah.
different way. So
Yeah.
let's talk about that.
Yeah.
How did you approach that and how did it work?
Yeah. Well, so if it's not clear, I have an Italian passport. So Europe was always on the table quite easily. It was one of the
Okay.
reasons why London was not on the table anymore, because we would have to get jobs and deal with visas. So that part of it was easy. This was the, as if it wasn't clear, this was the most thought we'd ever put into any move. Like, I think the Rwanda move from interview to moving was like, or from me starting to work there was like 6 weeks.
Whoa.
So this move was like, oh, a whole year to think about where you want to go. But once we got back from Christmas vacation, and we kind of knew that this was the move, the first step was schooling. So the Dutch have a process where if your plan is to integrate into Dutch community and into Dutch schooling, your kids go to a language school in Utrecht, it's for the first year. So it's a specialized language school that's only for kids who don't speak Dutch who want to go to Dutch school. So we were like, okay, let's make sure we had heard about that. I think at one point we did meet with like an education advisor that we just found online, but that was for Amsterdam. So we knew a little bit about the system, but like had to relearn it for Utrecht. So that was step one. Step two was selling all of our things in Rwanda, because my job had paid for us to move there and paid for a container. And we were like, we're not paying for a container back. Like, we can't do that. So it was like, okay, and there's a great secondhand market, right? Because it's hard to import things into Rwanda. So I sold everything. I mean, I sold hangers, and I just I had my own side hustle of selling all of our stuff, right? So step two was, and because the move from DC to London and then from London to Rwanda had all been paid for by work with a container, we didn't worry about yeah, we threw away some stuff, but you weren't too worried about it. But this was like, no, you really have to because we moved back with 40 boxes, which was basically just books and sentimental stuff. Right. And so it was like, you really need to get rid of everything. So that was my part-time job for the next 4 months in many ways. And then it was finding housing. So those were the two big things. I'm trying to think of, we didn't really worry about work because we were able to basically live there without needing to set up the right documentation for work right away.
Okay.
As Europeans. So my husband now has Italian citizenship, but at the time he didn't.
Mm-hmm.
So that process is fairly straightforward. Like, I register and then he can register. I exercise my rights to have my spouse, and then he can register after I've registered. So a lot of it was like, I have to do everything at first. I have to register myself, register the kids. I'm the one who can get the bank account. And then he can kind of come in and register, and then he can do all of the things that he needs to do. And then we started to figure out, we wanted to buy a house. So we had to figure out the mortgage situation, which was very complicated, which I don't recommend as two self-employed people. It's very hard to get a mortgage. So if anybody's moving to the Netherlands on our situation, I think just being realistic about when you can buy. And the housing market is really tough in Utrecht and across the Netherlands. So I think after schooling, housing was kind of our big thing. We know we want to buy, so we just want a temporary place. But then we ended up staying in the temporary place 2 years instead of 1, because it took us a while to sort out our mortgage situation and how do you buy and all of that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So we went
That's
with a
good to
furnished
point
rental.
out. Yeah. How did you find the furnished rental? What was your process of finding that? Did you do it online from afar? Did you work with an agency? How did you find that?
Well, you do have to work with an agency.
Mm.
We have friends who are moving there now, and kind of the only way to do it is to work through an agency because the market is so hot. With that said, we did get lucky. We had a place with an agency and they were dragging their feet on the contract. And then our friends who lived there had friends who were leaving a furnished rental. And so we were able to slot into that. But it is tricky, especially if you're not on a definite contract, right? Because they all want to see, the Netherlands really wants to see Dutch income. So they don't really take your global income into account. So like, my husband who had the job with the company that he founded in Rwanda, they were kind of like, that income doesn't count. What counts is your Dutch income. So you have to find like a landlord that is understanding of that.
Okay. That's good to point out. And I think people should be aware of that since it is a pretty, uh, I don't
Housing is
even, well,
important.
housing is important, but it's also, it's kind of like in the US too. It's the inventory is low, demand is high, and it's important to work with someone who knows that too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So I think, yeah, I mean, for anybody who wants to move to the Netherlands, right? I know a lot of Americans move here on the DAFT, which is great.
And it,
That's how most of the Americans I know who are in Utrecht are there on the DAFT, because it's such an easy way for them to be able to move abroad, right? And then you're on the path. Then you're on the 5-year path to permanent residency and potentially citizenship if that's something that you want.
mm-hmm.
And I think which can open up the rest of Europe to you if you don't want to stay in the Netherlands forever.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a really good path for anybody who's entrepreneurial, or even people who want to become consultants, right? You can, as long as you have more than one client, right? As long as there is the distinction between consultants who basically are full-time employees, right?
Mm-hmm.
They don't like that. They don't like, oh, I'm on a consultant contract, but I'm really a full-time employee. So you do have to have some diversity of clients.
Okay.
But you can like bring over your client, if you're working in the US and you have clients there, right? You can just bring them over and then they just pay through the Dutch. You just funnel it all through the Dutch entity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good point to make too. So a lot of people think, oh, I can just 1099 with my company, become a consultant, but really it's like for this particular agreement or the path, then you have to have multiple clients, right?
Yeah. And I think for any sort of self-employment in the Netherlands,
Mm-hmm.
they don't want companies, basically, they want to protect the employee. They don't want companies not paying the employment taxes that they need to pay and not covering
Mm-hmm.
all of your benefits and basically taking advantage of you and having you work full time on a consultancy contract.
Right. Okay.
So I think it comes from a place of employee protection.
Okay. Okay. Let's talk about your shift. So you've gone from working for years and years and years in the NGO. What's your next step once you get to the Netherlands?
Yeah, so when I was at that last year that I was in Rwanda, it was when I kind of started exploring what might be new or what might be different for me. And so I started working with local accelerators and incubators for startups as a pitch coach and a due diligence coach and just a general kind of business mentor slash coach, helping anybody who'd gotten accepted into these accelerators. And that felt to me like a really good way to use my skills. And a lot of the ones that they were working with were impact oriented. So they were grant funded by, like the German Development Organization or other development organizations. So they kind of were a bridge between my two worlds,
Mm-hmm.
right? Of I know how to measure impact and I know what like development impact looks like and how you do that in kind of an ethical way that is also measurable and quantifiable. And so being able to bring that to some of these startups, plus pitching is very similar to grant writing, right? It's a lot of like knowing who your stakeholders are. So a lot of the skills were transferable. And I was like, oh, I really like this. I also was at the point in my transition away from the NGO sector that I felt like, and I think I still feel this way now, that businesses are the way to build economies, right? The NGO sector brings in a lot of money, does a lot of creative and great, important programming. It does not actually build a local economy because the economy becomes so dependent on the philanthropic funds. And as we're seeing now with USAID being defunded, that has a really big effect when that money leaves a local economy. So with my skills, can I help local businesses become profitable, become revenue generating, and have the impact that they want? And so that's really what transitioned me. So when I got to the Netherlands, I was like, well, I know I really like this line of work. I know that I really love when I led a team, and led an organization. I loved the mentoring and helping people find roles that are really good for them and helping them figure out what they want. So I loved that, coaching, mentoring aspect of it. So I was like, let me get more skills around that. So let me get my coaching certification. And then I will use my coaching certification as a way to explore different business ideas.
Mm,
And I
smart.
had a couple of different like business ideas. And I was like, I'll use coaching as a way to test the market, talk to people, see what's there. And so then when I was done with my coaching certification, I actually did for a blip a company that was more around moving abroad. A lot of people were like, well, I want to know your spreadsheet. I want to know how you did it. And so
Uh-huh.
I started doing that. And then what I realized pretty quickly was a lot of the clients that were coming to me really wanted help on visa navigation and schools, a lot more of the logistics. And I really wanted to work more on those hard trade-offs. Like that was
Mm-hmm.
more interesting to me. I wasn't that passionate about the other side of the move. So I was like, okay, I don't think this is quite right. And so then I transitioned into what I do now, which is helping entrepreneurs build businesses. And that feels like a really good mix of like my strategic and organizational development experience, but also helping people build businesses they like and businesses that match the future that they want. Because a lot of people don't ask themselves those hard questions before they start building a business. They're like, I just want to do it. And then they don't like it, or it doesn't go the way they want to. And then they feel like they failed. And so I kind of get to bring in all of that into the work that I do now.
That's beautiful. And I like how you kind of segued into it based on really what you wanted to focus on and how you can serve the best. And I feel like there's a lot of opportunity for Americans and people in general right now to build their own purpose-based business to set up a lifestyle that they want, whether it's abroad or at home.
But I love working with people who are really trying to figure out what they want for the next phase of their life. So they're either kind of ready to start, right? A lot of them have been working on this track for 20 years and they're kind of at this midlife point and they're like, is this it? Like, I think I want something different, but I don't really know what different looks like. Or I'm really good at what I do. Like most of the people that I work with and the people I love working with are incredibly skilled at what they do and at their craft, but aren't quite sure how to actually turn it into a profitable, sustainable business that fits with their life. It's so easy to just be influenced by your partner or your friends who are like, oh, have you tried this idea? Have you tried that idea? And then all of a sudden your business is scattered across 5 different areas and you only really like one of them, but you're
Yeah.
scared to like narrow down into that one. And so I feel like those are the kinds of clients that I work best with and I really love working with because we can just bring them clarity in terms of what they want and give them the confidence to go after it with like strategic tools and a process and also a little bit of mindset work, which usually comes up around marketing. Everyone's scared to
Absolutely.
market.
Because marketing is selling and the selling is scary for a
Yeah,
lot of
and the
people.
marketing is telling the world what you're doing, and that
Yeah, it's
feels really
being seen.
scary.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, if I tell everyone I'm doing this, and then what if they think it's a dumb idea? Or what if it doesn't go well? What is that going to say
Mm-hmm.
about me? It's going to say great things about you. It's going to say that you tried, and there's only one way to know if it works, right? And it's going to say that you're courageous, and it's going to say that you're putting yourself out there, but that's usually not the stories we're telling ourselves at the
No,
time.
definitely not. Definitely not. It is an exercise in vulnerability, and vulnerability
Absolutely.
is really, really scary.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
So, for anyone who's really like, I mean, obviously, this audience is someone who's very interested in moving abroad and trying to find a, and for many, it might be, for some, it might be retirement. For some, it might be finding a job. I think for a lot of people, it's really, they're at that point, this point in their life where it's like, okay, I need a change. I don't know what that change is. Fits right into your kind of
Mm.
ethos of, that person who wants to use their skill set that they've built over the years to build something that is their own. What are some tips that you have for someone who is approaching this? Like, what's the first thing they should start thinking about?
I mean, I think the first thing they should do is some version of their 10-year vision for their life, right? So some version of what does my life look like 10 years from now? You know, Debbie Millman like famously had this prompt that is, okay, you're waking up 10 years from now on this day. Describe your whole day in full, from when you wake up to when you go to bed. Really envision what your life is like. And the reason why 10 years I think is so powerful is that 5 years you get too dragged into logistics. You're like, oh, is that really possible? Like, can I do that? But like 10 years, right? We're just looking at this future, right? And so then that's what you're working towards. Because I think any move, you need to know, you have to have some sort of anchor that helps you make decisions, right? And that 10-year vision really helps you get that anchor that you're going to base your, like for us, that anchor this time for the Netherlands was, where do we think we can stay for 10 years through secondary school? Understanding all. And that was really like, can we live in that city for 10 years? Like, can we live there? Right. And so you need to figure out what that anchor is for you as like a very first step. And then you need to map out what your values are and what kind of life you want to live. And you need to make your version of that criteria or that spreadsheet of like, what do I really care about? What do I really want? And then after you've figured out, right, if we take just a really strategic approach to this, right, this is what you would do for a business. So why not do it for your life? Right? Like, where are we trying to go? What's our North Star? What are our values, our criteria? And then let's think through the places that might fit that criteria. And then we can make decisions about trade-offs. But if you don't really know what you want, it's really hard to get anywhere.
Yeah. It's funny that you bring up Debbie Millman, because she was literally just on a podcast I listened to last week with, I believe it was it Mel Robbins? I think it was Mel Robbins hosted her on a podcast, and it was all about, designing your life on purpose. And she went through the exercises. I'm like, oh my gosh, that makes total sense. Like, it doesn't, and not having boundaries around when you're making this, crafting this kind of vision of where you want to be in 10 years, don't make it realistic. Like, really shoot for the stars and be as broad and as idealistic as you want to be, because you want to refrain from putting limits on yourself. Well, this is practical, and here's where I think I could be in 10 years.
Right.
Kind of throw that out the window and just start with the big, shoot for the moon, right?
Right. Because you might not get to the moon, but you're going to get closer than if you stay in like what you think is possible today.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right. And it can be very freeing. And like, I think it's good to do it and then go back and do it again, like a day later, and try to make it a little more scary. Right. Like, if it's not scary, it's probably not big enough.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think
exactly.
Yeah. Right. And I think I also have people do their purpose. And what I mean by like a purpose-led business is just something that you're proud of and that is aligned with your values, right? Something that is aligned with what you believe is good in the world, right? It doesn't have to be, like NGO style. It's really just like what feels aligned with you and your purpose and what you're good at in the world and what you like to offer people.
Yeah, I think a lot of times we get hung up on that big word purpose with a capital P, right? Like, what's my purpose of being here? And it could be as simple as helping others. It could be as simple as, waking up each day and being grateful and thankful for your life. It really could be so simple and not.
Yeah. Right. And I feel like mine is just helping individuals, right? I get a lot of value from helping individuals. And that was really defining for me, because I was like, oh, okay, I don't need to like help millions of people. The one-to-one interactions are incredibly meaningful for me. So if that's how I design my business, to be smaller and to do the one-on-one, like, that is very fulfilling for me. So that's how I think about purpose. Yeah, and it can change. We can all change.
Sure. But yeah, it's constantly evolving.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think allowing ourselves to change is also a really important thing when you're thinking of moving abroad. Right? Allow yourself to be a different version of yourself, to change, to want different things, to be different in one culture than you are in another. And just give yourself that freedom and that flexibility, because you will be. And if you try to hold on to the version of yourself in your current city, you're going to have a really hard time with the move, because the circumstances are so different wherever you go that you are going to be a different person.
Yeah. Yeah. And yet fundamentally you'll be the same, because wherever you go, there you are. So it's again, that duality.
Right. Yes. Right. You're not escaping things, but you are allowed to change.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. What advice would you give anyone who is looking to move abroad? What would you tell them?
So if you already know where you're going, right? We've talked about the advice on like how to move abroad, right? So if we take the point of view of like, okay, you've just landed, right? And you're settling into your new place. I think one, as I said before, give it a year, right? Don't let yourself question your decisions for at least a year. This is also a recommendation for before you move. My favorite thing to do is to join Facebook groups. So before we moved, when we had that list of like 4 or 5 cities, I joined the Facebook groups for all of those cities, like the parent Facebook groups, so that I could see what the conversation was like. I could understand the culture, and I could kind of see if it was a place that would align with me. But definitely when you move there, join the local Facebook groups. Unfortunately, I know we all have opinions on meta products, but unfortunately, I still think it's the best for local community and building. Don't be afraid to lean on other people, right? Don't be afraid to reach out. It's finding new friends in a new place is a lot like dating. So don't be afraid to date friends around, right? Don't be afraid, right? Like you muster all of your courage. Like I heard a North American accent on the schoolyard the other day. And I was like, okay, I'm going to be brave. I'm going to go say hi. Like, I don't know who this person is. And I was just like, hi, I love hearing other like North American accents. So like, just try to be bold, but also be kind to yourself.
I'm just curious, what are the 5 cities that made your short list besides Amsterdam, which turned into Utrecht?
Yeah. So, Amsterdam, Berlin, Milan. Why were we having a hard time thinking about them?
Lisbon was
Lisbon.
on there. Okay.
Lisbon was on there. That was the wild card. Was it just and London? But London got off the list because of visa stuff. So I think the top 3, we kind of had it finalized to Lisbon and Amsterdam. But then we were like, no, for that reason that I was saying in terms of like, we could move, like, no, our whole criteria was places we knew about. But because at the time Lisbon was such a hotbed of entrepreneurship, we were like, oh, maybe we would find good community there and like good for work. But we were like, too risky.
Yeah. I was going to end it, but I had a question that popped up, and I think
Yeah.
others will want to know, like, quality of life now that you have settled into the Netherlands. How is the quality of life? And can you speak a little bit about that?
I mean, for us, it's great. Things
Okay.
that were valuable to us were not needing to own a car, being able to be active on a day-to-day basis, right? We bike around everywhere. The schools are really great. As I mentioned, my kid is neurodiverse, and we've had a very helpful, supportive process in terms of diagnosis and just feeling like we're supported at home and supported in school. So that's for us, that's been huge. For work, we both have co-working spaces that we go to, which is great, which are walkable, that do stuff in English and in Dutch. So, I mean, the hardest parts are learning the language. I did not have on my life bingo card learning Dutch at 43, and here we are. And then building community, because when you move to a place that doesn't have a huge international community, you get more people who are established and don't have a lot of space in their life for new people. And that's totally normal, right? So I'm always on the hunt for, I'm like, who just moved here? Who needs a friend? Like, who has space in their life for a new friend? And Utrecht, being a smaller town, just doesn't have that same community that like Amsterdam would, for example. So I have to be really intentional about making friends.
Yeah.
There aren't as many like English speaking classes where I could naturally go and like find people.
Okay. Okay. And what about affordability? You have lived in some pretty expensive
Yes.
places in the States between Washington, D.C., New York, Boston. Comparable to your life now, what does it look like as far as affordability goes?
It's definitely cheaper than
Okay.
our time in the US. I mean, the big thing is healthcare, right?
Mhm.
We pay like 4,000 a year for a family of 4 with a 350 deductible, right? Like that's all we pay all year. And that's just, and with surgeries and all of that kind of stuff. And so that for us from affordability, it's like if you just think about how much you pay in healthcare in the US, right? Like that really helps you out a lot. I find housing prices to be pretty similar to kind of a medium to larger, we're not in like the New York, that was more like Amsterdam, right? Is more in that kind of world. So we're in a more affordable place, not the most affordable, but more affordable. So I feel like financially and affordability wise, we're kind of in the medium. If you wanted to come here and you needed a place that was more affordable, there are towns all around Utrecht that are right where you could get a house for under 500K.
Transportation is, if you're outside of major metropolitan cities, is pretty accessible besides
Yeah,
bikes.
Well, yeah, I mean, everyone's e-biking, right? We're all e-biking. There are buses, but there is like a lot of people who live in some of the other towns that are maybe like, and the Netherlands isn't big, right? It's very dense. It's very populated, but nothing is like too far, right? So you might bike. My husband goes to a co-working space in like a town over, and that's like a 20-minute bike ride.
Okay.
Right. So the distances aren't huge. If you are living in one of the towns around Utrecht, the distances aren't so big that you wouldn't be able to get there with an e-bike or a bike or the bus and public trans. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that.
Yeah, of course.
So where can everybody find you if they want to get in touch with you?
Yeah. So if they want to get in touch, they can go to my website at purposebuiltbylaura.com, or they can find me on LinkedIn. I love talking with people. So if anyone wants to learn more about my move or about my approach in working with businesses, please reach out.
Thank you so much for joining me today and joining us today. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I love that your journey has literally gone all over the place. Nothing is linear, right?
No.
But it shows that it's just, one, it's resilience, but two, it's like this can be done and it can be done easily. And I think you're going to be an inspiration to many, many people. So I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this conversation. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you. And that's it for today's episode. Thanks for listening and spending some time with us. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Make sure to follow the show and leave a review. It will really help others find us. And if you're dreaming about a life abroad or already living it, I'd love to hear from you. You can connect with me on Instagram at bargainhomesabroad or on our website, www.bargainhomesabroad.co. Until next time, keep exploring, keep dreaming, and I'll see you back in the armchair soon. Bye-bye.